I first said we need to ask, what is the evidence for atheism? And here Dr. Slizek says that the only evidence against God's existence is the absence of evidence for God's existence. Now this admission is highly significant because it means that he tacitly agrees that all of the traditional arguments for atheism, like the problem of evil or the incoherence of the concept of God, all of these arguments fail. The only argument for atheism is the absence of evidence for God. But the problem here is that the absence of evidence is not necessarily evidence of absence. To give an example, most cosmologists believe that the universe went through an era of inflationary expansion soon after the Big Bang. As yet, we have no positive evidence, however, for this era. But does that mean, therefore, that such an era did not exist? Well, obviously not. Or to give a more mundane example, we have no evidence that there is gold on the planet Pluto. But does that mean, therefore, that there is no gold on Pluto? Well, clearly not. So when, then, does the absence of evidence count as evidence that something does not exist? Well, theorists of knowledge agree that the lack of evidence for some entity X counts as positive evidence against X's existence only in the case that if X did exist, then we should expect to see more evidence of X's existence than what we do see. For example, the absence of evidence of a planet between Venus and the Earth is a pretty good reason to think that such a planet does not exist. Because if it did exist, we should have all kinds of evidence for it. Now, apply that then in the case of God. The absence of evidence for God's existence counts as evidence against God's existence only in the case that if God did exist, then we should see more evidence of his existence than what we do, in fact, see. In practical terms, what that means is this. If God exists, should we expect to see more evidence of his being than the origin of the universe out of nothing, the exquisite fine-tuning of the universe for intelligent life, the apprehension of a realm of moral and aesthetic values, the radical claims and resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth from the dead, and the immediate experience of personal fellowship with God? Well, I think the answer is obviously not. So to carry his argument, Dr. Slezak has to prove that it is highly probable that if God exists, we should have more evidence of his existence than what we do in fact have. And that, I think, is sheer speculation. And thus, in the case of God, I do not think that the absence of evidence is at all a positive argument against the existence of God, and yet that's all he's had to offer you tonight on behalf of atheism. So I don't think we've seen any good reason to think that atheism is true.